Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part thereof for the 5th of December 2025. Before we get into the news of what's been going on the front lines, hits and losses, just a bit of housekeeping. I am out I have, as many of you know, multiple sclerosis. We've got the Hampshire Multiple Sclerosis support groups Christmas lunch, so I'm out for lunch fairly soon, actually, and that will mean that there'll be a big gap of no content for quite a bit of today, and a few other things I have to do. So this video will be released, and then there'll be a big gap before anything else, just to give you an understanding of what's going on there. With regard to today's video, we are going to be talking about another plane that appears to have been hit by these medium range drones or long range drones, and that is on top of the plane I talked about in a breaking news video yesterday, and that's potentially on top of another plane that I referenced in a video that appeared to have been hit. So possibly 3 planes now in fairly short succession hit by these drones that I think are becoming more and more important. So that is really good news. We have strikes on oil refineries and whatnot in Russia again. Ukrainians have also hit a major building in the middle of Grozny in Chechnya, and that's pretty significant. And we're also going to talk, just reference, I need to do a whole video on this, the new American national security strategy document that was out that reads a bit like Christian nationalism writ large and anti-European, anti-alliance rhetoric. It is truly scary in a lot of what it references and the direction it seems to be going in. So I'll be making reference to that, because I think if you understand the national security strategy, you can understand possibly where the US is going with regard to international relations and peace in Ukraine. So that's a pretty scary document. Right. In the meantime, though, please remember to subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate all of your support. Thank you for getting us finally over the 60,000 subscriber mark. And if you want to stay up to date with what's going on in Ukraine and elsewhere, please then subscribe. Click the bell icon, select all rather than personalized, and then you'll be on your way. Okay, let's get into it. We have the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course, to this document, and you can see those caveats linked in the description below. We have 1,240 personnel lost. That is a big number, and that is also correlated with 94 vehicles and fuel tanks and 2 pieces of special equipment. The 94 vehicles and fuel tanks is pretty high, suggesting that the Russians are active in quite a number of places, attacking quite a lot, but also losing a lot of troops and unarmored material. 1 armored combat vehicle, no tanks at all. So that gives you an indication of what the Russians are doing in terms of how they're attacking and what vehicles they're using. But then 34 artillery systems. That's a very high number there, well over the daily average, and right back up to numbers we were previously seeing quite routinely. They've come down somewhat, but yeah, for some reason a bit of a spike yesterday. And 2 multiple launch rocket systems. That's a bit of good news there. Now we have an aircraft added to the list. That's very significant. Could be the one that I'm just about to show you. Could be the one I showed you yesterday. Could be the other one that's also caught on video. So I can't say how excited is probably the wrong word, but positive I feel about these kind of Boba Aubrey jet drones, Boba kind of medium range drones, FP2 drones that are being used, whether it's 30 kilograms or 105 kilograms. These pack a punch, and they are taking out serious amounts of material at the moment, like really high value stuff. We've seen the Primari, the Ghosts group in Crimea, causing havoc on the peninsula, but also active elsewhere in Donbass too. And it's just, this is one bit of good news for the Ukrainians right now. Now, the other stat on here that's worth dwelling on, 424 drones. When you add up the number of drones used last night by the Russians, we have 137. And then the night before, was it 111? You add those 2 numbers up and you fall very short of this number. So that indicates that the Russians are using a lot of drones during the day. I keep saying that, but just a bit of a reminder that the drone attacks don't stop after dawn breaks. They continue on through the day, and also these numbers will include things like Lancets and reconnaissance drones and larger drones that are also intercepted on a daily basis. Okay, let's go on to personnel issues. And Applebaum says, I am told that internal Ukrainian army information shows that more than 26,000 Russian soldiers were killed or critically wounded in the month of November, confirmed by videos. No wonder Putin wants to get Trump to give him territory for free. I mean, yeah, that Donbass territory, Putin would absolutely love that to be part of the negotiations, because it's one of the most heavily defended areas, what's remaining there of Ukrainian territory. No, it is the most heavily defended area. Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, all of the cities and urban areas, but also the rural areas, crisscrossed with all sorts of trenches and fortifications that have been worked on for some time now. It would be insanely expensive for Russia in terms of troops, for Russia to try and take that militarily. And, their figures are already looking pretty horrendous for their losses in the last month. I guess the question is how many people they are recruiting on a monthly basis. I'd love to know the true number there. And if we talk about strikes, this is coming from the Unmanned Systems Forces data that has been compiled by the Istribin Telegram channel. Unmanned Systems Forces hit a record 431 Russian soldiers on December the 4th. That's just one day. Unmanned Systems Forces, with 217 killed, 214 wounded. Of course, all of these are caught on camera because they're FPV drones that the feed is coming back to the operator, averaging 309 strikes daily over 7 days with a 57% kill rate. Istribin infographic has showed. Now, I don't quite understand. It will be Google translated here. So you've got destroyed, injured. So I presume these are report of the Forces Unmanned Systems of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. I presume these are human beings. Red would be dead, yellow injured. Average apples, I don't know what that means, but I presume that is just the average. But I don't know how the average is worked out. And then percentage destroyed. I don't know what that blue line means. Is that the percentage? Because there's a real dip there that doesn't really reflect what's going on. Anyway, I'm not quite sure of the last two, but as I guess the big takeaway here is the direction of travel, which is moving up in terms of percentage and in terms of just sheer numbers of Russian soldiers being killed and injured. These are really significant numbers of Russians, and the Unmanned Systems Forces clearly doing the lion's share of attritional work there for the Ukrainians, as you would expect, because this kind of activity does not involve generally the death of Ukrainian soldiers. Yeah, they will lose some drone operators because they will become target number one for the Russian drone operators and vice versa. So yeah, there will be attrition. But I mean, this is, if you're talking about ratio of drone operators being killed to the people that drone operators kill or injure, I mean, it's an incredible return on investment there. Now, I've talked about the need for Ukraine to think a bit more creatively when it comes to recruitment. This is Daria's crew. It's the first in Ukraine's National Guard to operate entirely without men. She and the 4 women under her command build their own explosives and launch armed drones along the southeastern front. Victoria, Tetiana, Alexandra, Marina, Daria, members of the drone unit Typhoon, the Typhoon drone unit. This is what they need to do, which is, okay, we're struggling to recruit young men. There is a black hole, a serious demographic black hole in the ideal age groups to recruit, and so we need to think a bit more creatively. How can we get veterans back? How can we get older people operating in ways that are still effective? How can we get injured people, disabled people to contribute? Are there certain jobs, like, for example, can you operate a mobile fire team machine gun on the back of an SUV with a prosthetic leg? Almost certainly. Okay, well, let's work on that. How can we fill these positions with people that 10 years ago we wouldn't have thought of doing? And here we've got a young all-female crew operating as a drone team on the southern front, and I assume they'll be just as effective in what they do. Right, so that's good news. Russian forces executed a Ukrainian POW, yet another war crime has been caught on camera. This is reported by Deep State, who say a POW surrendered with raised hands, and he was shot in a doorway in Sviatopokrovsk, southwest of Siversk. The Russians continually committing war crimes. Right now, we're going to get onto, one of the main headlines of this video. In 2 weeks, Primary, so again, the ghost unit Primary of the GUR destroyed 8 enemy targets in Crimea. So the last 2 weeks, stuff I presume we haven't seen. We've got a Su-24 bomber, antenna in a radio transparent dome, a 39N6 Castor 2E2 radar station, pretty high value stuff there. Orion drone, that's a larger sort of Reaper equivalent drone, I guess. 248YA6K1 Podyot radar stations. They're usually the ones with a tall mast, so I guess we'll look out for that. And a freight train and a Ural, so a drone at the end I think drops next to a truck next to a train. This is just really high value stuff that's continually being taken out by these drones. As you can see on the way, you can probably work out what drones these might well be by looking at what I assume is another one of these Ukrainian drones on the right there, but I don't actually know what drone it is. And here we have one of these radar domes being hit. Then we have other sort of radar installations. This could well, that's a Castor 2E2 radar being taken out. Then we have some kind of mast. We've got an Orion drone, so that is a fairly expensive drone, that one. And then we are moving on to the, is it the suit? No, we have another, this is a Podyot, maybe with its mast down. That's another Podyot there with its radar mast up. Then we're on to the Ural next to the train there. That's taken out. And here we see very clearly the Su-24 taken out at the end there. So let's look at that again, because that is a high value target, possibly the third plane in a week, really, in just a few days that we've seen evidence of being certainly hit. I assume that plane ain't going to be flying again. Assuming that these are the drones that they've been talking about previously, either the Boba, the Beaver drone, or the Aubrey 30-kilogram warhead into the side of a plane, or even just if it hits just on the ground by the plane, that is taking the plane out, and that plane won't be flying again. 30-kilogram warhead is 7 times bigger than, say, a Lancet drone. These are pretty sizable drones. And someone was saying yesterday, well, this might well have missed the MiG-29. No way, that MiG-29 is not going to fly again. You're not going to have, there'll be all sorts of shrapnel going through it, even if it is missed. Now, I think Bertold was saying, interesting, looking at this, it looks like, is it one of the wheels not operational here, or something to do with looking at this plane and wondering if it's operational or not. The cockpit's up, so they've got to be working on it. It's going to be, I would assume it is flying if the cockpit's up, and having just flown or just about to be flown, and this one gets hit. This is a breaking news I showed you yesterday. With this being hit, I mean, that drone is hitting right next to that. That plane is gone. So it's, in my opinion, that's 2 planes definitely gone. Then we've got more sort of radars and more equipment in this video as well. The one with the MiG-29 that I did a breaking news on yesterday. And there are just so many of these montage videos coming out. It just does make me feel rather positive about the Ukrainians here. Now, this is a video that has been put together by DW, the German outlet, where they've interviewed some of these crews and then spliced it with a bit of footage and talking about the Boba and the Aubrey drones with 30-kilogram warheads taking out refineries, airfields, aircraft, and defense systems and command posts, all of which we've seen an awful lot of with these sorts of montage videos. But then just part the way through this video, they splice in what looks like another plane being hit. Now, I don't know anything about this one, but here is another plane with crew there as well. Now, unfortunately, the drone then cuts out there. So I don't know. This I'm less sure as to whether this plane was hit and what damage was done. But if this drone managed to hit near that plane with those crew on the ground, that would be really, really significant. So potentially 3 planes, loads of these videos coming out at the moment. I feel quite positive for this domain in the war. Ukraine have really stepped up the production and usage of these medium range drones, where previously Russia had that advantage, but really they were using things like Lancets. Their drones were oftentimes, that were seen in those areas were reconnaissance drones spotting for Iskanders, right? Spotting for missiles that then used against Ukrainian launchers and whatnot. Well, here we have glorified FPV drones with a much larger range and much bigger warhead, and they are having really tremendous success. So, as I said yesterday, every morning I wake up thinking, "Oh, I hope there's a new video," and today didn't disappoint. Today we've got a video with an S-24 antenna of a radio transparent dome, 39 N6 Castor 2E2, Orion drone, 2 Podliot radar stations, and a freight train with a Euro. Su-24 bomber. I mean, this is brilliant. MiG-29, another plane possibly. Happy days. Right, Cursed Empire, the 100th Motorized Rifle Brigade, destroys enemy equipment in the Konstantinivka direction. I could show you plenty of these sorts of videos, but just to let you know that this kind of activity is taking place on both sides, every single day. Drones hit an MTLB, 5 cars, 2 motorcyclists, an invader, a truck, a buggy, an ATV, and 5 antennas. So when we come back to these lists, and you're thinking, okay, 94 vehicles and fuel tanks, but only 1 armored combat vehicle. Well, for example, that could well be the MTLB is your combat vehicle, your old school APC, and then everything else here, you've got a truck, 5 cars, a quad, a buggy. It is unarmored vehicles that the Russians are predominantly using and losing. On the other hand, we do have video here of the Russians claiming the destruction of a Ukrainian V7, Magura V7 USV, unmanned surface vehicle, equipped with 2 AIM-9M Sidewinder missiles. So these are the kind of classic American air-to-air missiles being used here in ground-to-air mode. This is supposedly a Lancet taking out the Magura V7 there. As you can see, substantial explosion there as a Lancet hit, and no doubt takes out, there's one of the missiles cooking off, takes out probably the fuel on board. It does seem like that boat wasn't moving. I wonder if it had been disabled already, or whether they send these boats to just hang out in the Black Sea waiting for, and there it is sinking, waiting for a target to come into view. But anyway, the Russians there using Lancets to take out the Ukrainian USV that's fairly well loaded. A warhead from a Shahed was installed on a Ukrainian ground drone, which will now be sent back to the Russians. Here's a bit of inventive use by the Ukrainians, taking a Shahed warhead, which is a 90-kilogram warhead. That is fairly big. That's a big old bit of... So that Lancet that you just saw take out the Magura V7, probably 4.5, 5-kilogram warhead on there. So you got a 90-kilogram warhead here, is considerably bigger. This can cause quite some trouble for the Russians. I wonder how they will use this UGV, where they will send it, and whether it'll get to the Russians before it is taken out, gets the Russians and takes itself out. But anyway, a bit of inventiveness there. Use what you can find. Now we move on to distant strikes, and 137 drones were sent into Ukrainian airspace last night, 80 of which were intercepted. That is a pretty poor interception rate. In fact, that's a very poor interception rate. That's 57 drones getting through last night. Now, I don't know if that's because some were still in the air when this was released. That, if I was to be as positive as possible, that could be what's going on there. I don't know if Tim White has anything. He often has a little bit of commentary on the figures there. No, we've got, oh God, so much to talk about. There really is. I see if he has, sorry to mess you around here we go. There are a lot of hits overnight. Yeah, 58%. So yeah, it's just 80 out of 137, 58% interception rate. I do like the fact he does the percentages for me. 13 locations hit with 57 drones. So that is one would assume is a hellish night for the Ukrainians. But actually, we have virtually no information of these strikes. I've got the idea that Kharkiv region, Chernihiv was bombarded. At least seven drones smashed into the town. Although there are no injuries reported so far, authorities say a non-working industrial enterprise was hit. Yeah, and the rest of the information coming through last night was strikes on Russian targets there. So I don't know. I don't know if Tim, as well as scheduled power outages across Ukraine, further emergency shutdowns are introduced in a number of regions. It follows more overnight attacks now affecting Kharkiv, Sumy, Poltava, Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kirovohrad, partially those regions. And I guess they have taken out energy infrastructure, the Russians, or have attempted to. 12-year-old boy was killed when Russians hit Dnipropetrovsk at night. In the Vasilkivka community, a residential area was hit with a drone. The child's parents were injured. That's heartbreaking. And Nikopol as well. Just seeing if there's any, no other news. So that is, like I said to you many days, or I've told you many times before, when the Russians have a lot of drones getting through and we don't have that much footage coming out, I do worry that it's predominantly hitting energy infrastructure or sensitive military targets or military industrial complex targets. And that is worrying. So it's potentially a good night last night for the Russians. It's a low interception rate, 57 drones getting through, 90-kilogram warheads. I presume most of the ones getting through would be loaded with warheads rather than being decoys or whatnot. But yeah, here we have just that one video there of Chernihiv being targeted last night, 7 drones striking there. Okay, then we go on to what the Ukrainians were doing last night, and yet another pretty good looking map with regards to what the Ukrainian drones and how many there were, what they were aiming for, where they were flying. We have some going towards Crimea, as is often the case, a few going across the Sea of Azov to hit the Russian coast along there. We'll come to that soon. And then the vast majority heading towards, I don't know, that's towards Syzran, Samara, and then a bunch going up into Kursk Oblast as well. Now, we do have quite a bit of information, or at least some information on some of the strikes last night. Ukrainian forces struck the Russian port of Temryuk in Krasnodar region. So these would be those drones that you can see just going across the sea here, just a few of them, but doing some damage to the Russian port of Temryuk. Krasnodar, large fire was seen there. Really good news. In fact, as you can see, quite a bit of imagery coming out from Temryuk. Something definitely on fire. That's the seaport area burning as a result of tonight's attack, says Special Kherson Cats. Temryuk, the gas tank is on fire, is a claim from Max 25 here with video of something burning on the horizon. And then locals report an attack as well on the oil refinery in Syzran in Samara region. I said, sorry, what did I say earlier? Not Syzran, I pronounced it incorrectly. Anyway, Syzran, that's been targeted multiple times previously. The Ukrainians going for it again. A refinery in Syzran, Russia, under attack, as you can see there. Now, remember, sometimes you might be looking at flares, chimneys flaring as they try and get rid of gas to minimize damage done. But that looks a little bit more than a chimney flaring, to be perfectly honest. Here we've got a bit of a grainy video. Looks like there are 3 distinct fires going on there, but again, can't tell what is flare and what is destruction from drones and missiles. But certainly that's more than just the chimney flaring there in Syzran from that video. So it looks like Ukrainians have had success there, hitting yet another oil refinery. And then we have this building right in the middle of Grozny in Chechnya that's been hit. and that is a fairly modern looking building. This morning Ukraine's drones made it to Chechnya, and one looks to have hit the Grozny City tower. It may be due to electronic warfare, looks very likely, although the business center does contain the Chechen Ministry of Finance, the Security Council, and the regional Russian Ministry of Justice. So there could be some value in striking that building, but it looks more likely that that would have been sent awry by electronic warfare or air defense. But it's quite some damage that done to a fairly remarkable building in the city environs there. So Ukrainian drones struck a 145-meter Grozny City skyscraper, which houses the Chechen Security Council and other government offices in occupied Chechnya. And we see some imagery from the other direction. You can see how widespread that damage is to the building. Quite a few floors affected, and a number of other windows taken out. And then you've got that fire that was still burning in the initial video that we saw here. Was it this one? Fire still burning. Well, yeah, you can see smoke coming up. There's one video that has the fire. Yeah, that one there. So still very much on fire in that video. So Ukrainians having quite a variety of targets, it seems, overnight. During November, operators of the first operational center of the SBS carried out 108 combat missions to destroy 88 targets. And there's a bit of a 3-minute montage video of all sorts of things getting blown up. And we forget, as we move on to the next day and the next set of data, we forget just the massive destruction that both sides are causing to the other side just on a nightly basis. It's just huge. And all of the videos that emerge later from activity that takes place that we don't hear about the very next night. So if we go back to this map here, I mean, how many drones have we got flying into Russia? And I'm showing you sort of 3 different areas. You've got Syzran, you've got Temryuk, and we've got Grozny. There's going to be plenty more taking place last night that we are not aware of, and maybe we won't ever become fully aware of. So yeah, the unmanned systems forces, or in this case the SBS or GUR, all these different units. Then you've got Refineries, the kind of medium range stuff. They are all active every night, just consistently degrading Russian capabilities. Now, concerning what the Ukrainians have done in terms of striking tankers in the Black Sea, the Turkish Foreign Ministry has summoned Ukrainian diplomats over these attacks. As Haber writes, it was proven not only to Ukrainian but also to Russian diplomats that Ankara does not welcome such clashes in the Black Sea. So quite a bit of pressure coming from the Turks there with regard to the change of approach from the Ukrainians. Insurance rates in this context for ships trading in the Black Sea have jumped sharply following Ukrainian strikes against vessels belonging to Russia's shadow fleet. This is reported by the Maritime News webpage Splash 247. The already small profit margin for Russian oil tankers takes another dent. I wonder about the insurance situation with the shadow fleet, whether they are all fully insured, whether they try and get away with not insuring their tankers. That would make it very difficult for them to go into certain ports that require you to have insurance. But then you get these transfers of oil from one ship to another in the middle of the sea with transponders turned off. It might be a case where an uninsured ship then puts a load of oil onto an insured ship and masks where it comes from. I don't know. And then the second ship goes to an insured second ship goes into port. I don't know. But anyway, it's also worth wondering whether the insurance spike will hurt Ukrainian ships or not Ukrainian ships transporting Ukrainian goods going into Odessa, particularly grain, whether this could hurt the Ukrainians in terms of the spike of insurance costs there. Okay, moving on, but there'll be plenty more emerging throughout the day. Now, the US national security document is out, right? This is what it looks like. 2025 national security document. I've done an AI synopsis of it and a comparison of this to the Obama one in 2015, the Trump one in 2017, and the Biden one in 2022, and this new Trump one. And essentially, it is an America first, almost sort of Christian nationalist, pro right-wing populist parties abroad documents, right? It's a bit of an anti-alliance, anti-EU document that has some references and phrases that I think are deeply, deeply concerning. Shashank Joshi from The Economist says it's a truly sinister document. Corey Shaker from the AEI, American Enterprise Institute, so pretty right-wing, although more libertarian, sort of pro, anti-regulation organization, the AEI. But the Trump national security strategy is an act of vandalism against the things that actually make our country strong, safe, and prosperous. So you've got someone from the AEI saying that, like, this national security strategy is highly controversial. Gustav Gressel, an Austrian or Austrian German, I think he's in Germany, but I think he's Austrian, military analyst, says a regime that is tip to toe corrupted by Arab money. So this is the American regime, he's saying. As a European, he's saying a regime that is tip to toe corrupted by Arab money intends to lecture us on the defense of Christianity. This is the most ridiculous foreign policy document I have ever read. And I read many of these. Just, regime change in Europe. Effectively, our goal should be to help Europe correct its current trajectory. We want to work with aligned countries that want to restore their former greatness, cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations. I mean, it's an anti-EU, anti-European document, although they see Europe as being great when it's basically white and has patriotic, right-wing, nationalist, populist parties in charge. Chris Owicki says the new US national security strategy blames undemocratic European governments for failing to make peace with Russia, takes a pro-Russian position on NATO, reflects white nationalist views on European demographics, and pledges overt support for far-right parties. While the strategy states that, quote, it is a core interest of the United States to negotiate an expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, it says that, quote, the Trump administration finds itself at odds with European officials who hold unrealistic expectations of the war, perched in unstable minority governments, many of which trample on basic principles of democracy to suppress opposition. Chris Owicki says this is likely a reference to European regulation of social media and the 2024 annulment of the Romanian election due to Russian interference. The strategy blames European governments for failing to make peace with Russia, but does not mention the strongly pro-Ukrainian sentiment across European populations in virtually every country other than Hungary and Italy. Quote, a large European majority wants peace, yet that desire is not translated into policy in large measure because of those governments' subversions of democratic processes. So in other words, it's saying that Europe's support of Ukraine is a subversion of democratic processes, and actually people want peace irrespective of justice. And that's not true. If you look at the polling, anyway, the strategy explicitly praises the rise of far-right patriotic parties allied with the US Republicans. Quote, America encourages its political allies in Europe to promote this revival of spirit, and the growing influence of patriotic European parties indeed gives us cause for great optimism. In other words, the AfD, Reform UK, Rassemblement National, Vox, these are parties and movements that gives the American Trump administration great cause for optimism. Over the long term, it said, so the influence of white nationalism is also reflected in this paragraph, which alludes to the great replacement conspiracy theory, the idea that you get, you purposefully have mass migration coming in of brown-skinned people to replace white people, so that they are more likely to vote liberal or vote Democrat in the US. That would be, and it's just simply a load of nonsense there. Quote, over the long term, it is more than plausible that within a few decades at the latest, certain NATO members will become majority non-European. They mean non-white. As such, it is an open question whether they will view their place in the world or their alliance with the United States in the same way as those who signed the NATO Charter. Wow. The strategy places the US on the side of the far-right white nationalist forces, saying that it wants, quote, Europe to remain European, to regain its civilizational self-confidence, and to abandon its failed focus on regulatory suffocation. That would be kind of social media regulation, among other things. Among the priorities it lists are, quote, cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations, which strongly suggests overt US support and assistance for far-right parties such as the AfD in Germany, National Rally in France, and Reform UK. Another priority is taken straight from the Kremlin's worldview, quote, ending perception and preventing the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance. This is bad news for Ukraine, but also for the Western Balkan countries who have applied for membership. Overall, it's very clear that the strategy reflects JD Vance's views, as expressed in his 14th of February 2025 speech at the Munich Security Conference, in which he argued that Europe's principal threat is from the erosion of democratic norms rather than Russia or China. It's a big problem. Shashant Joshi says Trump's national security strategy is out of some of the Europe sections, and some of the Europe sections are shocking. Quote, the growing influence of patriotic European parties indeed gives us cause for great optimism, says Joshi, or quotes Joshi. Trump national security, make Europe white again. That's how Shashant Joshi sees it. Quote, over the long term, it is more than plausible that within a few decades, certain NATO members will become majority non-European. The real and more stark prospect of civilizational erasure. So the idea that European civilization is being erased. As far as I can see, this national security strategy is far harsher on Europe than on Russia. There is no mention of a threat from Russia or of deterrence, only that, quote, re-establishing strategic stability is a priority. Europe is cast as a major threat to freedom, a radical, dangerous document. So the reason I spent time on this in the hits and losses videos is when we get to the other section, like what is the US doing with regard to peace negotiations? If you understand their national security strategy, then they're just going to get into bed with Russia, and they hate Europe, and Europe just wants to prolong this war because, I don't know, they're not democratic. And they're suppressing the real feelings of the Europeans. It's an absolute freaking shocker. Right, I did my breaking news update yesterday, one of mine, on 4 unidentified military-grade drones breaching a no-fly zone in Dublin just minutes after Zelensky's plane landed. They targeted the exact flight path and then circled. So plane landed early, but had it arrived on time, then you would have had these drones in exactly the place where the plane would have been. So are they trying to crash into the plane? Are they looking out for the plane? Are these different, who controls them? Were they Russians? Were they hobbyists? But then the claim is that these were military grade large drones. They targeted the exact flight path and circled an Irish Navy vessel deployed for the visit. Ireland is probing it as a potential hybrid attack. So that's what I reported yesterday. The US Treasury has temporarily eased sanctions on Russian oil giant Lukoil. Oh, who knew? Extending a license that allows its overseas gas stations to operate without restrictions until April next year. So on the 4th of December, the US Department of Treasury authorized operations with Lukoil gas stations outside Russia by issuing a general license valid until April the 29th next year. According to Reuters, this allows transactions for about 2,000 gas stations, petrol stations across Europe, Central Asia, the Middle East, and South and North America. So easing those sanctions, I don't know, to make it easier for Lukoil. On the other hand, Russia has Russians are warned of a possible banking crisis in the Russian Federation. So there are lots of overdue loans. 28% of loans are overdue. Is that right? That's what I reported yesterday. And here we have Center for the Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting reported a rise in the banking crisis in 2026. So could well be a bit of a economic issue for Russia going forward. Now, Europe, the EU Defense Commissioner Andrius Kubilius has said Europe needs its own peace plan for Ukraine. You're starting to see Europe say, screw you, the US, you're not helping. The US has brought out its national security strategy. Europe is saying, we need to do this on our own, maybe. And then you had the leaked telephone call that I talked about. Go and check out the live stream with myself and Jonathan Fink yesterday, because I think this is one of the most important things that's happened over the last month, really. Is that the telephone call between the German Chancellor, French President, the Finnish President, and the Secretary General of NATO. All those 4 people are saying things like the US is looking to betray Ukraine. They're playing games with us. And we need to look out for Zelensky to protect Ukraine from the US. All of these 4 nations, 4 entities, one is obviously the former Dutch leader, but now the Secretary General of NATO. All of these four were recognizing the threat that the US is overtly, and then that transcript is leaked to the press. This is like, we all knew this, like we all imagined these people as saying these things, but when it gets out in public, then it's a very explicit kind of screw you to the US. You are trying to ruin Ukraine and you're on Russia's side. Then the national security document comes out, and then we're left thinking, you and I are left thinking, oh my goodness, are we going to see a divergence here? Are we going to see a divorce between the US and Europe? And what does that mean for Ukraine? Then you get the Russians. So this is on propagandists on TV saying perhaps Russia and the USA will decide the fate of Europe without it. The fate of Europe without Europe. Discussing Ukraine without Ukraine. Discussing Europe without Europe. The Russians are like, yeah, we'll get together with the USA and decide the fate of Europe. This is a very possible prospect. Russian propagandists are discussing which countries can exist and which cannot. In their opinion, the quote historical existence of Europe and European states has come to an end. As for the US, the question remains open. Wow. So then we had the whole thing about the Belgian Prime Minister, again, talked about in my live stream yesterday, where he is not wanting to release the Euroclear funds for the massive reparations loan to Ukraine. Ukrainians say that Belgium's Prime Minister Bart de Wever holds the key to Russia's defeat after he said that Russia's loss in Ukraine was a total illusion. So he not only did he say, don't really want to give this money over, but if you think Russia are going to lose, it's a fantasy. And he was basically really quite pro-Russian. De Wever was speaking in an interview with Belgian newspaper La Libre the day before the European Commission announced the repatriations loan, a plan that could lend up to 210 billion euros in immobilized Russian central bank reserves to Kiev. Ukrainian officials, lawmakers, diplomats, and soldiers warned that by opposing the plan, De Wever is protecting Russia more than he is protecting Ukraine's, Europe's, and even Belgium's own security. So this has been really controversial. Now, the Belgian PN has then set out conditions for Ukraine's repatriation loan. He says the EU must ensure full mutual risk sharing. So if Belgium does release these funds, then they can't shoulder all of the risk for doing so. And that totally agreed. I totally agree with that. Belgium may receive guarantees of liquidity and risk protection. I'm not sure what the details of that would be. Costs must be shared proportionally among EU member states. And again, I agree with that. Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, has been so worried about this that he's now today embarking on an emergency trip to Belgium to convince Bart de Wever over dinner to drop his opposition to the 165 billion euro frozen Russian assets loan for Ukraine. So he's skipping a planned trip to Norway for this. So this is how important. He's cancelled going to Norway. He's going to Belgium. This is how big this is in the EU. Showing the seriousness of the issue. The issue is extremely serious for Merz, as there are only 2 weeks left to agree on using the frozen Russian assets, state money. Ukraine urgently needs a new loan, and alternative funding options don't seem viable for now, so via EU taxpayers. This is really, really serious stuff. Now, the UK is getting involved, and somebody asked me on the live stream yesterday, well, what about the UK's 25 billion in frozen Russian assets? Well, they're not part of the EU. The ones that aren't locked up in Euroclear, can the UK do something? Well, UK bids to unlock £8 billion of frozen Russian assets to aid Ukraine. Ministers are prepared to hand the frozen funds to Ukraine and warn that Putin is an active threat to Britain's citizens and its security. Yesterday, a report on the Sergei Skripal poisoning came out, and the report found that Vladimir Putin is morally responsible for the death of Dawn Sturgis, the woman who died as a result, that British woman, in the attempted poisoning of Sergei Skripal in Salisbury some years back. So that's good timing there. Ministers are prepared to hand over 8 billion quid of Russian assets in Britain to support Ukraine, as they warn that Putin is an active threat to UK's citizens, security and prosperity, according to the Times. Excellent stuff. And then, as part of it's Britain pulling out the stops here. Again, proud Brit today. As part of an international push to increase pressure on Putin, the UK is attempting to broker a deal with the EU and other countries, including Canada, that could release as much as £100 billion for Ukraine's war effort. So these might be other funds that aren't maybe in Euroclear in Belgium, but a whole load of other frozen Russian assets. The UK is trying to broker getting that to Ukraine. So Ukraine needs money desperately. And this needs to happen. So both from the EU point of view and from other nations as well. Okay, that's enough from me. Sorry to go quite a lot on the subject of the national security strategy, but I think it's super important, and I'm not going to be with you for much of the rest of the day. Otherwise, I would have just done a separate video straight away on the national security strategy. So I've just appended it to this video. Sorry, not sorry. It is what it is. Thank you very much for listening. Really appreciate your support, and please remember to subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thank you. Take care. Speak soon, or not too soon.